Okay, going on with my story. So Barbie, my youngest sister, she tried to help, but and then we talked about other news, and she's going to be giving me some power tools that I really would like to have that she's got in her basement. But anyway, that's beside the point. I left her house and I continued up the alley uh, instead of going out onto the street. Because when I go through Roaring Spring, instead of going right through the center of it, it's small. I kind of snake around the outside streets as much as I can because I like to look at the houses, the way they're framed, the way they're built, where the chimneys are, and I study it. I love that town. So I'm going up. I think it might have been called Walnut Street. I haven't learned the street names yet, but anyway, I was going along, and here in front of me was a horse and buggy. It was pulled over, and it was pulled over because there was a car coming the other way, and there was a parked car, and so he pulled over, and the car coming the other way went around the parked car, and past me, and then he drove his buggy on past the parked car, and now I was behind him, and I thought, you probably realize, you can maybe guess what I did. I crowded him a little bit to indicate that I wanted to get past him. Normally, I would just sit and enjoy the slow ride. And so he moved his buggy over a little bit, and I went past him, and there was a stop sign coming. This is just street to street to street. And I went up to the stop sign. I stopped the car. I got out, and I headed back on foot toward the horse and buggy. And he slid the glass door open. The horse and buggy but had a sliding glass door on the side. And I immediately started to speak. I said, "I've got a very unusual question for you." And he wasn't intimidated or anything. He was an old guy. He was just sort of curious and friendly. He was riding along beside his wife, and it was cold. I mean, they had blankets over him, and just one horse. But he pulled up, and I explained to him my dilemma. I said, "Is there anybody around here that speaks Pennsylvania Dutch and English?" And and he sort of said, well, pointed to himself and of course his wife. They all study English in school. Uh, it's kind of necessary. They realize it's necessary to get by in this area. And I went on to explain that I wanted to learn Dutch and that I could do it if I just had somebody that would answer my questions for, say, an hour a week. And anyway, to make a long story a little bit shorter, we had a delightful conversation. There was a little street, so no cars were going by, and and I think he's going to be the guy. He and probably his wife. He told me where they lived, which is not in, well, it is in Roaring Spring in a way, but not in the borough. But it's right on the road. I go by the way into their house every time I come to Roaring Spring. He said, "You may have a little trouble getting up a lane because apparently they don't plow their lane, when I'm in a car." And but they were going the other direction. I don't know where they were going, but I asked him, "Do you have a phone number, or do you have a phone?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, he said, "Well, do you have a smartphone?" And I said, I didn't even have a pen or a paper. I said, no. I told him I use my line, which there's some truth to it. I've said this to Amish before, that in some ways I'm more Amish than the Amish, at which point they laughed. But I said I've never had a cell phone, and but I said, but he was going to give me his phone number, and I said, well, how? I said, and his wife Laura, his name is Mervyn. She started to look in her purse. Maybe she had something to write with, and I said, never mind, I'll just memorize it. What is it? And he told it to me and told me how I could memorize it. 4 4s and an 8, and all the rest of it was just the area code and Roy Spring number, and I said, well, maybe we could talk about this, and I think he's going to be willing to let me stop at his house and do this. We talked about languages. Just it was cold out, and his horse was starting to get restive, jumping up and down a little bit, and but he was curious. I said I speak 5 languages, and he wanted to know a little bit about that, and I said I have a spelling system of my own, so I can write it. So now that, and then we ended the conversation. I drove on, and I immediately started to tell this story to people at the hardware store where I stopped, where there's a man who wants to be a Shakespearean actor, and I gave him a whole pile of scripts, Shakespearean scripts. Then I went up to the meat market, and up in the meat market, I told him, and went up to the meat market and I bought my weekly supply of meat, and there was a woman back there, a young woman, and I said to her, I said, "You're wearing a bonnet. Do you speak Dutch?" And she said, "Yeah." So there was another one. She was from out in Ohio or Illinois, I think. But I hadn't asked there really because people there were just too busy to have the leisure to sit down like what I needed. So we had a delightful conversation. And then when I got to Danny Kaye's, I told her my story, and she said, she was amazed. She said, "You stopped and got out of your car and walked back? You must have scared him." I said, "No, I was wearing a white sweater. I didn't look anything like a policeman." And but she knew about my search and a little bit, because I told her a couple of weeks before I was trying to find somebody like that. And then I stopped at the Spring Dam Brewery, and I told Jeremy, the bartender, my story. And now I'm telling you my story. I'll be calling them today, and I'll let you know what happens. But maybe that was my 80th birthday present. All of a sudden, today I just turned 80. Bye for now.